Okay, so in this video, let's actually add some respawn boxes. And I've changed the texture to be something light so the platforms stand out a little bit better. And what I'm going to do is you'll see this, you'll figure it out. What I'm going to do here is add a cube, or you'll see where I'm going with this. And what I can do is I can take the cube and I can kind of put it down on the ground here. And then I'll start transforming it. I'll scale it, make it pretty big in the X dimension, maybe 2 in the Y dimension, lift it up out of the ground, and maybe 10 in the Z direction. And what I can do now is I can have more than one of these, and these will be the respawn boxes for the player, and maybe just for the sake of making this kind of easy to understand, just up and running quickly. I'll make 4 of them or something. And rather than leaving this thing named cube, I'm going to call it respawn box 1. And maybe it would make more sense for me to move my platforms over here into the corner or something like that. And eventually I'm going to put walls around this so it's not quite so ugly. Or I could put terrain and fog around the edges to make it look pretty. But the point is that there's a box that the player can fall into. There we go. All right, and then, what I'll do is here I'll select the platforms and the FPS controller. I'm just going to lift all of these guys up so the player's kind of more in the air. How about that? Something like that. There we go. Let me double click on the player so there we go. That's looking more respawn boxy. And then why don't I duplicate this guy here? I'll just say, and I'll make that respawn box 2. So what we could do is make checkpoints. So if you land in a different box, you'll get put in a different place on the board. So now what we need to do is write a script that we're going to put on the respawn box. Oh, and now these boxes are solid and they're ugly. But of course we don't want them in the scene. So what we're going to do is turn off their box colliders and turn off their mesh renderers. So they are invisible and not solid so that the player can actually fall into those boxes. But they're just there on the ground. So to write a script, I'm going to click on the assets folder here. I'm going to right click on a blank area. And then I'm going to say create a C# script. Oh no, I don't want to do that. I want to put these in a folder. Let's make a folder called scripts. How did I do that? Oh, there it is. New folder. And I'm going to call it scripts. You should always put your stuff in folders. I'm going to drag my script into my scripts folder. I'll double click on that folder to go into it. And there's my script. Now what I want to do is rename it. So I'll just kind of single click on the name here. And I'll call it respawn box. There it is. So there's my script. And now I will double click on this to open this in Visual Studio. Whoops. And there's my script. Now, if you don't have Visual Studio, or if you have MonoDevelop opening but you want Visual Studio, you can configure this. You can actually go over to the Edit menu, and if you come down here to Preferences, you can, under External Tools, you can select the compiler you want to use. So I'm going to use Visual Studio 2017 because that is a good compiler, very easy to use. And now let's go back to Visual Studio and work on our script here. So we're going to need 2 things here. Well, let's add a bunch of things. Let's add an object that the player is going to get teleported back to when they fall into the box that's in the respawn point. So let's make a public game object, and we'll call it respawn point. And then let's also add a variable for the player. It doesn't have to be public, but we could make it public. It'll be game object, and let's call it player. We don't really technically have to do this, but it doesn't hurt. Now let's, in the start function for this script, let's go find the player. Let's go get a reference to the player object. How do we do that? We're going to look the player up using a tag. What's a tag? Well, it was in those videos, those Unity videos, the official tutorials. you have the option of going to any object and setting a tag on it. So what I've done here is I have set the tag on the FPS controller to be player. And if I needed more tags, you can add you can add more tags. You can zombie, enemy, whatever, treasure, end zone. We're going to set the tag to player. Player is a built-in tag. So this is like we have slapped a label that says player on the FPS controller. And now we can check, we can find this object using its tag. So in our code, I can say player equals, I have to say game object dot find with tag, and then I can say find me the one who's tagged player. So assuming there's only one player in the game, this will retrieve me the player object, and now I can manipulate the player. I can do things to the player, like put the player somewhere else. All right. How do we respond to the player falling into the box? Well, okay, so let's go back to our box, our respawn boxes, and let's take a look at some of the options here. For the respawn boxes, we want to we want to enable the collider, and we want to make it a trigger. There we go. I misspoke. So when something is a trigger, it becomes like an invisible alarm zone. If we uncheck this, now it's a solid thing. Now it's an invisible alarm zone. And what we're going to do is listen for objects entering this trigger box on these objects. So how do we do that? Well, there's a function that we can add to our program here, or to our code, and that is onTriggerEnter. And that function will get called when something falls into that trigger box. Void onTriggerEnter. And I just hit tab and it all auto-completed for me. And this collider is the collider on the thing that fell into the box. And it knows what object it's attached to. So we can check the tag on that object. So I'm going to write an if statement here. I'm going to hit if and hit tab twice, and Visual Studio will auto-complete it for me. I'm going to check the tag on the object that collider is attached to. And I can do that by saying other dot, oh, actually I can just say tag. All right. I was going to do other.gameObject.tag, and I guess if that's the same thing. So the the collider's gameObjects tag, but I guess they shortcutted it to other.tag. And I want to make sure, I want to check to see if it's equal to the word player. If that happens, then the player fell into the box. And what I'm going to do here is log a message to the console that says player fell into, and then I'm going to put the name of the object here. So if we fall into respawn box 1, it'll say player fell into respawn box 1. Now, how do we actually move the player to the respawn point here? Well, what we're going to do, this just changed in Unity 5.5. It's a very recent change. It drives me crazy. I had to go hunting through documentation. You would think that you could just change the FPS controller's transform position to something new and the object would move. It doesn't, because the first-person character controller, or the character controller is taking control of the motion and overriding any changes that you make. It's very frustrating. So I will show you how to circumvent that. Normally, if you just change an object's transforms, you go into an object and you go into the transform and you change the position, that object will move somewhere else. It just doesn't work with the FPS controller, unfortunately, because of recent changes to Unity. So I'll show you how to do it. What we have to do is actually disable the character controller component and then move it and then re-enable it. It's not that hard. So let's get the character controller. I guess it's called character controller. There we go. And I'll call it C equals player.getComponent of type character controller. So this is called template notation. So this is get the component of type character controller off of the player object. If we go to the inspector, you'll see the FPS controller has a character controller component on it. So we can get that component and we can enable it and disable it with this little checkbox right here. So we're going to go in and we're going to disable it. Then we can move the player. Then we can re-enable the character controller. and then the player can move again. So we have to be sneaky about this. So C right here is a reference to the character controller on the player, and then we can say C.disable. C.enabled. Enabled equals false. So we're going to turn off that component. And now we can move the player somewhere else. And if we look at that character controller, it actually has a transform, and the transform has a position. And we can set that to a new location. Where are we going to set that to? To the respawn points transforms position, right? So up here we have an object called respawn point. We're going to set it to this guy's transform position. So that'll move, that'll, equals means takes thing on the right and stuff it into the thing on the left. So take the respawn points position and assign it to the player's transforms position, and then let's re-enable the character controller. Otherwise the player won't be able to move. This is much more complicated than it used to be, and I just spent like half an hour combing through documentation trying to figure out why it doesn't work. So that should actually work now. All right, so if I go to my scene, what I need to do, let me go to respawn box 1 here, and I'm going to drag the respawn box script onto that object. I'm going to drag it to a blank area down here, or I could just drag it. I could drag it up onto it like that because the script class cannot be found. Why is that? Okay, so when you get that error, it's because the name of the script, if it says the class can't be found, it means that the name of this file doesn't match the name of the class. Oh, and you can see there's a mistake. Somehow this got mangled. This thing, new behavior script, this has to match the name of the file. The file is called respawnbox. Normally Unity does this correctly. This is just kind of a fluke that this happened. But if it ever tells you a class can't be found, it's because the name of the file doesn't match the name of the script. Okay, so now it should all be happy. And I should be able to put that script onto, there it is, now it worked. Okay. So now you see our two public variables show up here. They're public, so we can see them in the inspector. Now we don't actually have to do anything with the player. This is the player. We're going to find the player using the tag. But the respawn point, this is where we're going to move the player. So let me go to the first platform here, and if I right-click on here, can I say create a 3D object cube? And look, it made a cube as a child of platform 1. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to raise this cube. Oh, whoops. Oh, yeah, that's interesting. So the cube got scaled because it is attached to an object that is scaled. So it got the transform of the scaling of its parent. But that doesn't matter. It doesn't matter. So what we're going to do now, I mean, we could, if that bothers you, you can find the scale tool here, and you can shrink it down, or make it squarer or something like that. But what this object is going to be invisible. We're going to turn off its box collider, and we're going to turn off its mesh renderer. It is an invisible object right there. Let's call this object respawn point 1. And what I'm going to do now that it's positioned in the correct place, I'm actually going to drag it off of the platform. So now it's a top level object. It's kind of invisible right there. And so what I'm going to do now is let's go to respawn box. The respawn box needs to know where to put the player. So I'm going to take the respawn point and I'm going to drag it onto the respawn box. So when the player falls into the respawn box, the script will put the player at the respawn point. So let's test it out. And what I can do now is I can have different respawn boxes have different respawn points. We can just kind of clone that whole thing. So let's run it and see what happens. So there's our player, kind of way up in the air. And I don't like the fact that I can see the edge of the terrain. That's no good. And if I fall, what happens? Oh, yoink. Oh, look, I'm back on the platform. And let's look at our console. So it says the player fell into the respawn box. Now, whoops, player. Okay, so yoink. Now the problem is if I jump completely over the box, I'm gonna fall off the edge of the world. That's a problem. But now watch, if I take the respawn point and I move it somewhere else, like over here. You see where this is going, right? And I jump off of the platform and I fall into the box. Whee! Oh my, all right, so that is that was a bad idea. So I'll put it back where it was. But now what you can do is you can create multiple respawn boxes, and each respawn box is provided with the location of a respawn point. And let me just, since I've got that other respawn box, let me just walk through the process of setting that one up as well, just so you can see it again. So what I want to do is make sure that its box collider is checked and its trigger box is checked. I'm going to take that respawn script and I'm going to drag it onto that object. And now what I need to do is create another object where the player will be placed. So let me just click on a blank area here and I'll create a cube and I'll call it respawn point 2. And somehow that thing got created way over, far away from the world. Sometimes Unity just creates things in the middle of nowhere. It's kind of annoying. But that is looking... Okay, so that's reasonable. That's at least in the world. And I'm just kind of scrolling in and out with the mouse there. And so now what'll happen is, this will be interesting. Okay, so now let me go to respawn box 2. And let me drag in respawn point 2. You know what I'm going to do? This will be really cool. I know this is kind of stream of consciousness coding here. I want to put it in the respawn point. It's kind of annoying having the respawn points be invisible. So no, you know what? Let's just leave it alone. So let's just put them where you want them, and then take your respawn point, turn off the mesh renderer, and turn off the box collider. So it's just an invisible object. All right, how much time have I got here? What am I doing as far as recording? So I'd say that's enough for a day. Let's just get your respawn boxes working. I'm going to put the kind of freeze frame the code there so you can see that it works. And well, there you go. So now you can actually start laying out your respawn points and your respawn boxes, and you know, you can make checkpoints. So what I would do is actually I would probably start building the platforms around, kind of make a spiral or something that goes up, and then just put the different respawn boxes around. And you know, once you've got your obstacle course figured out, that's going to kind of inform you as to where your respawn boxes are going to go. But there you go. So hopefully that wasn't too hard. If you have any problems, just take a screenshot of your errors, email me, message me through Schoology. I'm happy to help. I mean, this is the fun part of the year, right? This is the payoff for all the hard work. So this should be fun and easy. And if you need help, don't hesitate to ask.